A new chapter begins. The morning sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, casting golden rays over the modest but cozy space. 10-year-old Leila Morgan stood on her step stool, her small hand skillfully packing her father's lunch. She carefully placed the sandwiches, turkey and avocado, her dad's favorite, inside the brown paper bag, ensuring everything was just right. It wasn't just a task, it was a cherished ritual between father and daughter, one they had upheld since Lila's mother passed away 3 years ago. Every morning, they worked together like a team, their bond unshaken despite the challenges life had thrown at them. "Daddy, you're going to be late again," Leila called, her voice lilting with a playful tone. Her brown eyes sparkled with amusement as she listened to the thundering footsteps above. James Morgan, her father, appeared moments later, his tall frame filling the doorway. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and he looked slightly disheveled in his suit. "Morning, sweetheart," he said with a warm grin, his voice deep and comforting. "Guess who got stuck on the crossword again?" "Let me guess," Leila teased, hands on her hips. "It's the riddle about the mirror, isn't it?" James's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "How'd you know?" "Because it's easy, Daddy." Leila giggled, hopping down from the stool. She grabbed his tie and started knotting it with small, nimble fingers, mimicking the technique her late mother had taught her. The answer's reflection. Mirrors show everything backwards, but never wrong. James looked at her, half in awe and half amused. "You're something else, kiddo. You've got your mama's smarts." He pulled her into a tight hug, the kind that made Leila feel like nothing could ever go wrong as long as her father was there. But their moment was abruptly interrupted. "Good morning, family." Lisa Crawford Morgan's polished voice rang out as she entered the kitchen. She moved with an air of practiced elegance, her blonde hair styled in soft waves, and her makeup immaculate despite the early hour. Wearing a sleek, tailored dress, she looked every bit the picture-perfect stepmother. Leila's smile faltered ever so slightly as Lisa glided across the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "James, honey, you forgot your vitamins again," Lisa said sweetly, placing a hand on his shoulder and leaning in to kiss his cheek. Leila's sharp eyes caught the faint smudge of lipstick left on her father's cheek, but she said nothing. Instead, she watched as Lisa pulled a small pill organizer from her handbag and handed it to James. Her father gave an appreciative smile, but Leila noticed a flicker of something, unease perhaps, in his expression as he swallowed the pills with a sip of coffee. "You're such a lifesaver," James said, though his voice lacked its usual enthusiasm. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Lisa flashed a radiant smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's what I'm here for," she replied, her tone saccharine. Leila turned her attention back to her task, pretending to be busy with the lunch bag. She didn't trust Lisa, though she couldn't quite explain why. From the moment Lisa had entered their lives, Leila had felt an unease she couldn't shake. Lisa was always perfectly polite, always impeccably dressed, and always smiling. But there was something cold beneath the surface, something that made Lila's instincts scream to stay wary. As James kissed both Lisa and Leila goodbye and headed off to work, Lisa turned her attention to Leila, her expression shifting ever so slightly. "Now, Leila," Lisa began, her tone dripping with forced warmth, "why don't you go get ready for school? You don't want to be late." "Yes, Mom," Leila replied politely, though her stomach churned. She didn't like the way Lisa's smile never quite reached her eyes. There was something unsettling about it, like a mask hiding something far more sinister. Leila hurried upstairs to grab her backpack, but her mind was racing. Over the past few weeks, she'd noticed small things. Whispered phone calls Lisa made when she thought no one was listening, odd packages arriving at the house that Lisa quickly tucked away, and strange comments that seemed to carry hidden meanings. At first, Leila thought she was imagining things. After all, she was just a kid, and adults often dismissed her observations as childish imagination. But now she wasn't so sure. Back downstairs, Lisa was on the phone, her voice low and hurried. Leela paused at the top of the staircase, straining to hear. Yes, everything's going as planned. He took the pills again this morning. It's only a matter of time now. Leela's heart skipped a beat. Who was Lisa talking to? And what did she mean by it's only a matter of time? She crept back to her room, her mind whirling. Something was very wrong, and she needed to figure out what. For now, she would play along, pretending everything was fine. But deep down, Leela knew she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. That night, as she lay in bed, Leela made a silent promise to herself. She would protect her father no matter what. She didn't know what Lisa was up to, but Leila was determined to find out. If no one else would listen, she'd just have to uncover the truth on her own. And so, the wheels of her plan began to turn, setting the stage for a battle of wits and courage that would test the limits of her 10-year-old mind and her unbreakable bond with her father. Whispers in the shadows. The following day, Leela woke up with a new sense of determination. Something was wrong, and she couldn't just let it slide. She had to protect her father. Quietly, she tiptoed down the stairs, hoping to catch Lisa in another one of her whispered phone calls or peculiar actions. But the house was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Leela hesitated at the bottom step, her instincts on high alert. Usually, by this time, Lisa would be bustling around the kitchen, sipping her green smoothie or making cryptic comments to herself. Instead, the silence stretched, heavy and uneasy. Leila crept into the kitchen and froze. Lisa stood by the counter, her back to the door, her phone pressed to her ear. "No, I told you. It's not ready yet. He needs to trust me completely before we can move forward." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Yes, the pills are working, but I have to be careful. The girl is too observant. She's always watching." Leela's heart raced. The pills. Her father's vitamins. What was Lisa doing to him? Before Leela could process the thought, Lisa turned around. Her blue eyes narrowed slightly, but she quickly plastered on her usual smile. "Oh, Leela, you startled me. How long have you been standing there?" "Not long," Leila lied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I was just coming to pack Daddy's lunch." Lisa chuckled softly and reached for a knife to cut fruit. "Such a good little helper," she said, her voice sweet but with an edge that made Leila's skin crawl. "James is lucky to have you." Leela forced a smile and started pulling out sandwich ingredients, all the while keeping an eye on Lisa. Every move the woman made seemed calculated, as though she were always playing a role. Leila couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa's entire presence was an act, a mask hiding her true intentions. When her father entered the kitchen a few minutes later, Lisa's demeanor changed instantly. She lit up like a beacon, her every action aimed at dazzling him. "Good morning, darling," she greeted, planting a kiss on his cheek. "I made you a smoothie. It's full of nutrients. You need to take better care of yourself, you know." James smiled appreciatively, but Leela noticed his hesitation as he took the smoothie. He seemed tired, more so than usual, and his eyes lacked their usual sparkle. "Thanks, honey," he said, taking the sip. "I've been feeling a little off lately. Maybe this will help." Leela bit her lip, her chest tightening. The pills. The smoothie. Is she poisoning him? The idea was terrifying, but it also made sense. Over the past few weeks, James had been more fatigued, more forgetful. Leila had chalked it up to stress, but now she wasn't so sure. She needed proof, something concrete to show her father. That evening, Leila waited until the house was quiet. Lisa had gone to bed early, claiming she had a headache, and James was in his study. Leila crept downstairs, her flashlight in hand, and headed to the kitchen. She had seen Lisa place the pill organizer in a cabinet earlier, and now she needed to find it. Her heart pounded as she opened the cabinet doors one by one, careful not to make any noise. Finally, she found it. a sleek black pill organizer labeled with the days of the week. She opened Monday's compartment and tipped out a small white pill into her palm. It looked ordinary enough, but Leela knew better than to trust appearances. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her freeze. Quickly, she pocketed the pill and closed the cabinet, her mind racing. She darted behind the kitchen island just as Lisa entered the room. The woman's silhouette was illuminated by the dim light of the moon streaming through the window. She stood still for a moment, her head tilting as though she were listening for something. Lisa muttered to herself before heading to the refrigerator. She opened it, retrieved a bottle of water, and then left as quietly as she had come. Leela let out a shaky breath. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to calm down. She needed to figure out what the pill was. But how? The next day at school, Leela showed the pill to her science teacher, Mrs. Hanover. She was a kind woman who always encouraged Lila's curiosity and never dismissed her questions. Mrs. Hanover, Leela began hesitantly, "Do you know what this is?" Mrs. Hanover examined the pill carefully. "Where did you get this, Leela?" she asked, her tone serious. "It's my dad's vitamin." Lila lied, not wanting to reveal too much. "I just wanted to know what it does." Mrs. Hanover frowned. "I'm not a pharmacist, but this doesn't look like a typical vitamin. It might be a prescription drug. You should have your dad check with his doctor to make sure it's safe." Leela nodded, though she knew she couldn't simply tell her father. He trusted Lisa too much. She needed more evidence. Over the next few days, Leela became a silent observer, watching Lisa's every move. She noticed how Lisa always made James's coffee, how she insisted on organizing his meals and medications. Leela even found a small stash of unfamiliar bottles hidden in the back of the pantry, all labeled with strange, unpronounceable names. One evening, Leela followed Lisa when she stepped out for yoga class. Instead of going to the gym, Lisa drove to a nondescript building on the edge of town. Leela, hidden behind a row of bushes, watched as Lisa met with a man in a dark suit. They exchanged a briefcase, their conversation too muffled for Leela to hear. As Lisa drove away, Lila's heart raced with questions. Who was the man? What was in the briefcase? And what was Lisa planning? Back home, Leela decided it was time to take action. She couldn't wait any longer. That night, while Lisa was in the shower, Leela sneaked into her stepmother's bedroom. She rummaged through the drawers, her heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of neatly folded scarves, Leela found a folder labeled Morgan Estate. She opened it and gasped. Inside were documents detailing her father's financial assets, life insurance policies, and a will, one that had been updated recently to include Lisa as the primary beneficiary. But the most chilling discovery was a handwritten note in Lisa's neat script. "Once the plan is complete, everything will be mine. Just a few more weeks." Leela's hands shook as she stuffed the folder back into the drawer and ran to her room. She didn't sleep that night, her mind racing with everything she had learned. Lisa wasn't just dangerous, she was planning something terrible. And Leela was running out of time. She needed to act fast to save her father before it was too late. Little did Leela know, the storm was only just beginning. Piecing the puzzle together, Leela didn't feel like a child anymore. As she sat at her desk with the folder she'd swiped from Lisa's drawer, a growing sense of responsibility weighed on her small shoulders. Her father's life might be in danger, and she was the only one who seemed to notice. She spread out the documents under the soft glow of her desk lamp, scanning each page with meticulous care. Among the financial documents and will revisions was something that caught her attention. A handwritten schedule, annotated in Lisa's tidy script. It listed dates and times, paired with cryptic notes like D increase and MD confirm. Lila's brow furrowed. She didn't know what the abbreviations meant, but they didn't look innocent. Then there was the last page in the folder, a detailed life insurance policy. It listed her father's name as the insured, with Lisa as the sole beneficiary. Lila's stomach churned as she reread the figures. The payout was massive. Enough for someone to live comfortably for the rest of their life. Enough to motivate someone with a heart full of greed. Lila carefully folded the papers and placed them back in the folder, tucking it under a loose floorboard in her room. Her instincts told her that she'd need the documents as proof, but more importantly, she needed to figure out what the pills were and why her father had been feeling so ill lately. The next morning, as James sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee, Lila studied him carefully. His usual energy was absent, replaced by a sluggish demeanor and pale complexion. He rubbed his temples, squinting at the morning newspaper. "Daddy, are you feeling okay?" Lila asked, her voice light, but tinged with concern. James glanced at her, offering a weak smile. "Just a little tired, sweetheart. I've been having these headaches lately. I think it's the new vitamins Lisa got for me. Maybe they're not agreeing with me." "Have you told Lisa?" Lila pressed, keeping her tone innocent. James shook his head. "I don't want to worry her. She's been so good about looking after me." Lila bit back the urge to scream. Her father's trust in Lisa was unshakable, and it frustrated her to no end. She needed concrete proof before she could convince him otherwise. That afternoon after school, Lila biked to the local pharmacy with the pill she had hidden in her backpack. The pharmacist, a kind older man named Mr. Patel, greeted her warmly. "Lila, what brings you here today?" She hesitated, then pulled the pill out of her pocket. "Mr. Patel, do you know what this is?" Dad's been taking it, and I just want to make sure it's safe." Mr. Patel examined the pill, his expression growing serious. "This doesn't look like a vitamin to me. It's a prescription medication. Let me check." He disappeared into the back room and returned a few minutes later, his face grave. "Lila, this is diazepam. It's a sedative often used for anxiety or muscle spasms. It can cause drowsiness and confusion if taken regularly, especially without a proper prescription. Does your father have a condition that requires this?" Lila's stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. "He doesn't." Mr. Patel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Lila, if someone is giving your father this without his knowledge, that's very serious. You should talk to an adult you trust immediately." She nodded, her mind spinning. Thanking him quickly, she biked home, her thoughts racing. Lisa wasn't just controlling her father, she was drugging him. And for what? The insurance policy loomed in her mind like a dark cloud. That evening, as James sat in his recliner watching TV, Lila decided to test her theory. She sat beside him on the couch, casually mentioning, "Daddy, have you ever thought about switching vitamins? Sometimes different brands can work better." James glanced at her, puzzled. "Switch? But Lisa said these are the best for me." "Yeah, but they might not be," Lila said, keeping her tone light. "I mean, you've been feeling tired lately, right? Maybe we should ask the doctor about it." James rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You might be right. I've been meaning to check in with Dr. Peterson anyway." Before Lila could press further, Lisa entered the room, her expression sharp as a blade. "What's this about switching vitamins?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes calculating. "Oh, nothing," Lila said quickly. "I was just asking Daddy if he's feeling okay. He's been tired, that's all." Lisa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "James, darling, if you're not feeling well, we can always adjust the dosage. But these vitamins are top of the line. Trust me, I've done the research." James nodded, seemingly reassured. "I know, honey. Thanks for looking out for me." Lila felt a pang of frustration. Lisa had him wrapped around her finger, and breaking that trust would take more than just suspicion. It would take undeniable proof. That night, Lila stayed up late, scrolling through articles on her tablet about diazepam. The more she read, the angrier she became. Long-term use could lead to dependency, memory loss, and even more severe side effects. Lisa wasn't just drugging her father, she was slowly destroying him. Leela also researched wills and life insurance policies, trying to understand the legal jargon she'd seen in Lisa's folder. One phrase stood out. In the event of the insured's death, the beneficiary receives full payment. Leela shivered. Lisa wasn't just hurting her father. She was planning to take everything. The next morning, Leela enacted the first step of her plan. She slipped the pill organizer into her backpack, making sure Lisa wouldn't notice it was gone. Then, during lunch at school, she approached her friend Emma, whose mother was a lawyer. "Emma, can I ask your mom something? It's really important." Emma nodded. "Sure. What's going on?" Leela explained the situation as vaguely as she could, leaving out names but describing the life insurance policy, the pills, and the suspicious behavior. Emma's mom, Mrs. Rivera, listened intently when Leela visited after school. "Leela, this is serious," Mrs. Rivera said, her tone grave. "If what you're saying is true, you need to talk to your father immediately. He has the right to revoke that policy or amend the will. And as for the pills," she hesitated, "this could be considered criminal activity." Leela felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't imagining things. Lisa was dangerous, and now she had an adult who believed her. Armed with new resolve, Leela returned home and prepared for the hardest conversation of her life. She needed to confront her father, show him the proof, and convince him that Lisa wasn't the woman he thought she was. But as she stepped into the house, her heart sank. Lisa was sitting in the living room, her expression colder than Leela had ever seen. In her hands was the folder Leela had hidden under her floorboard. "We need to talk, Leela," Lisa said, her voice dangerously calm. For the first time, Leela felt true fear. Lisa knew. And now, the game had changed. The mask comes off. Lila's heart pounded as she stared at Lisa, the folder clutched in her stepmother's perfectly manicured hands. She fought to keep her face neutral, but her mind was racing. How did she find it? Had she been watching me all along? Lisa's expression was unsettling, her usual plastic smile replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. "You've been a very busy little girl, haven't you?" she said, her voice low and sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. She gestured toward the couch. "Sit." Leela hesitated, but then she reminded herself of why she had started all this in the first place, to protect her father. She stepped forward, her legs trembling, and sat down. Lisa remained standing, towering over her like a predator sizing up its prey. "Do you want to explain?" Lisa began, her voice icy. "Why you were snooping through my personal belongings?" Leela swallowed hard. "I wasn't snooping," she lied, keeping her voice steady. "I just found it." Lisa's lips curved into a mockery of a smile. "Oh, really? Just found it? And what, exactly, did you think you were going to do with this?" She shook the folder for emphasis, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Send it to the police. Show it to your father." Leela didn't answer. Instead, she met Lisa's piercing gaze with as much courage as she could muster. She wasn't going to let Lisa intimidate her. Lisa's smile faltered, and her eyes narrowed. "You've been meddling in things you don't understand, Leela. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Leela clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I understand enough," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You're hurting my dad. I don't know why you're doing it, but I know you're not who you pretend to be." Lisa's face hardened, and for the first time, the mask truly slipped. Her expression was cold, cruel, and utterly devoid of the warmth she had feigned for so long. "You're a smart little girl," she said, her tone venomous. "Too smart for your own good." The sound of the front door opening made both of them freeze. James was home. "Leela." "Lisa, I'm back," James called from the hallway. Lisa's demeanor shifted instantly. She straightened up, her face smoothing back into her usual composed smile. "In here, darling," she called, her voice cheerful and sweet. James entered the room, his tie loosened, and his briefcase in hand. He looked between Leela and Lisa, frowning. "What's going on?" "Oh, nothing serious," Lisa said, her tone breezy. "Leela and I were just having a little chat. She found some of my paperwork and got a bit confused." Leela's blood boiled at the way Lisa twisted the truth so effortlessly. But she knew she couldn't confront Lisa outright, not without undeniable proof. Her father's trust in Lisa ran too deep. James turned to Leela, his brow furrowed. "Is that true, sweetheart? Were you messing with Lisa's things?" Leela opened her mouth to speak, but Lisa cut her off. "It's okay, James. She's just curious. It's natural for kids her age." "But Leela, honey," she added, her gaze locking onto Leila with a subtle but unmistakable warning. "You should always ask permission before going through someone's private belongings." Leela clenched her teeth but nodded. "I'm sorry," she muttered, forcing the words out. Her father gave her a disappointed look, but Leela saw the fatigue in his eyes. He was too tired to question her further. Lisa beamed, placing a hand on James's shoulder. "Why don't you go freshen up, darling? Dinner will be ready soon." James nodded, too weary to argue, and left the room. As soon as he was out of earshot, Lisa turned back to Leela, her smile dropping like a mask. "You're going to stay out of my way," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Do you understand me? If you don't, I promise you'll regret it." Leela glared at her but said nothing. She couldn't afford to provoke Lisa any further, not yet. That night, Leela lay awake in bed, her mind racing. She couldn't let Lisa scare her into silence. If anything, her stepmother's reaction confirmed that she was hiding something sinister. But now Lisa knew that Lila was onto her, which meant she'd be even more careful. The stakes had never been higher. The next morning, Leela made a decision. She couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed someone who could help her, someone Lisa couldn't manipulate. But who? Then it hit her. Mrs. Rivera, Emma's mom. She had already believed Leela's suspicions about the life insurance policy. Maybe she could help now. After school, Leela biked to Emma's house, her backpack stuffed with the pill organizer and a few documents she had taken from Lisa's folder. Mrs. Rivera welcomed her warmly but immediately noticed the tension in Leela's face. "What's wrong, Leela?" she asked, her tone concerned. Leela hesitated, then blurted out everything. The pills, the life insurance policy, Lisa's threatening behavior, it all spilled out in a rush. Mrs. Rivera listened intently, her expression growing more serious with every word. "Leela, you did the right thing by coming to me," she said when Leela finished. "This is bigger than you realize. If what you're saying is true, your stepmother could be committing serious crimes. We need to get your father out of this situation before it's too late." "But he won't believe me," Leela said, her voice breaking. "He trusts her. She's been drugging him, and he doesn't even notice." Mrs. Rivera placed a comforting hand on Leela's shoulder. "Then we'll have to show him proof. I'll take the pill organizer to a lab and have the contents analyzed. If they confirm it's being used improperly, we'll have solid evidence." Leela nodded, relief washing over her. Finally, she wasn't alone. Over the next few days, Leela worked closely with Mrs. Rivera to gather more evidence. They documented everything. Lisa's secretive phone calls, the mysterious man she had met, and James's deteriorating health. Mrs. Rivera also contacted a private investigator to dig into Lisa's past. What they uncovered was chilling. Lisa had been married twice before, and both of her previous husbands had died under suspicious circumstances, one from a heart attack and the other from a mysterious accident. In both cases, Lisa had been the sole beneficiary of substantial life insurance policies. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture they painted was terrifying. Lisa wasn't just manipulative, she was a predator. One evening, as James sat in his study, Leela knocked on the door. "Daddy, can I talk to you?" James looked up, smiling wearily. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Leela hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "It's about Lisa," she said, her voice steady but soft. "There's something I need to show you." James's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "What is it?" Leela handed him the folder she had retrieved from Mrs. Rivera's house. "Just read this, please." As James flipped through the documents, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief and finally to anger. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "It's proof," Leela said, her eyes filling with tears. "Lisa isn't who you think she is, Daddy. She's been drugging you. She's planning something terrible." James stared at her, stunned. "Leela, this is... I don't even know what to say. Are you sure about this?" Before Leela could answer, the door creaked open, and Lisa stood in the doorway, her face a mask of fury. "What's going on in here?" she demanded, her voice cold and sharp. For the first time, James turned to Lisa with suspicion in his eyes. "I think you'd better explain this," he said, holding up the folder. Lisa froze, but only for a moment. Then her expression hardened. The mask was gone, and her true nature was on full display. "You shouldn't have done this, Leela," she said, her voice low and menacing. James stepped in front of Leela, shielding her. "Lisa, I think you need to leave." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, James." But for the first time in years, James didn't back down. "No," he said firmly. "The mistake was trusting you." Confrontation and chaos. Lisa stood frozen in the doorway, her icy blue eyes darting between James and Leela. The confident, composed facade she had worn for months cracked, revealing the simmering fury beneath. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, the sound echoing like the ticking of a bomb. "James," Lisa began, her voice a dangerously calm whisper, "you don't understand what's happening here. Leela is a child. She's confused. She's twisting everything." James held up the folder, his hand trembling. "This isn't confusion, Lisa. These are legal documents, my life insurance policy, the pills you've been giving me, the strange schedule. Explain this." Lisa's expression flickered, her mask faltering. "I can explain everything," she said, her tone smooth but forced. "The pills were prescribed to help with your stress. You've been overworking yourself, James. I've been trying to take care of you." James shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why hide it? And why do these documents show you as the primary beneficiary of everything I own?" Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. She shifted her gaze to Leela, her expression cold and venomous. "You've been digging where you shouldn't, Leela. You don't understand the consequences of your actions." Leela stepped out from behind her father, her small frame vibrating with defiance. "I understand plenty," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You've been lying to us, drugging Daddy, and planning to hurt him. I'm not afraid of you." For a moment, Lisa's face contorted with rage, but then she laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down Leela's spine. "You think you're so clever, don't you? But you've only scratched the surface." The sound of footsteps approaching the front door interrupted the tense standoff. Lisa's head snapped toward the hallway, her eyes narrowing. "Who's that?" she demanded. James glanced at Leela. Confusion etched across his face. "Were you expecting someone?" Leela nodded, her heart racing. "I called someone. I had to, Daddy. I couldn't do this alone." Before Lisa could react, the doorbell rang, followed by a firm knock. James moved toward the door, but Lisa lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "James, don't answer that," she hissed, her composure unraveling. "They'll just make things worse." James yanked his arm free, glaring at her. "You've already made things worse, Lisa." He strode to the door and opened it, revealing Mrs. Rivera and a tall man in a suit, the private investigator she had hired. "Mr. Morgan," the man said, holding out a badge. "I'm Detective Harris. I believe your daughter has uncovered some serious concerns about your wife." Lisa's face paled. "Detective," she stammered, her voice unsteady. "This is absurd. Whatever Leela told you is a child's overactive imagination. There's no proof." Detective Harris stepped inside, followed by Mrs. Rivera, who gave Leila a reassuring nod. "Actually, Mrs. Crawford Morgan," Harris said, his tone cool, "we found quite a bit of proof, enough to warrant an investigation." Over the next hour, Detective Harris laid out the evidence he and Mrs. Rivera had gathered. They showed James the lab results from the pills, confirming they contained diazepam and were not prescribed in his name. They presented documentation of Lisa's previous marriages and the suspicious deaths of her former husbands, both of which had resulted in significant life insurance payouts. And they shared the findings of Lisa's financial activities, which included secret accounts in her name and payments to an unknown associate. James sat at the dining table, his hands gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face was pale, his eyes filled with disbelief and betrayal. "Lisa," he said finally, his voice breaking, "is any of this true?" Lisa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood by the window, her back to the room, her shoulders tense. When she finally turned around, her face was a mask of cold defiance. "Fine," she spat, her voice laced with venom. "You want the truth. Yes, I plan to leave, but only because you've made it impossible to stay. You and your bratty daughter have done nothing but make my life miserable." James's eyes widened in shock. "Miserable? I've done everything for you. I trusted you, Lisa." Lisa's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Trusted me? You barely noticed me. You were so wrapped up in your perfect little daughter and your precious memories of your dead wife." Leela flinched at the words, but James stood, his anger boiling over. "Don't you dare talk about my wife like that." Lisa sneered. "Oh, spare me the righteous indignation, James. You're pathetic. I gave you a chance to be happy again, and you threw it away." Detective Harris stepped forward, his expression stern. "Mrs. Crawford Morgan, that's enough. Based on the evidence, we'll need you to come with us for questioning." Lisa's eyes flashed with panic, and for a moment, it seemed like she might resist. But then her shoulders slumped, and she smirked, as if conceding to a game she knew she couldn't win. "Fine," she said, holding out her hands. "But don't think this is over." As the detective escorted Lisa out of the house, Leela felt a wave of relief wash over her. The tension that had hung in the air for weeks finally lifted, leaving behind a silence that felt both strange and comforting. After Lisa was gone, James sat on the couch, his head in his hands. Lila sat beside him, unsure of what to say. Finally, he looked at her, his eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude. "Leela, I don't know how you saw through her when I couldn't. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you sooner." Leela hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his broad shoulders. "I just wanted to protect you, Daddy," she whispered. "You've always protected me." James kissed the top of her head, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the bravest person I know, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." As they sat together, the nightmare of Lisa's betrayal slowly began to fade, replaced by the unshakable bond between father and daughter, a bond that no one could ever break. But Leela knew one thing for certain. She would never let her guard down again. Healing and hope. In the days following Lisa's arrest, the house felt quieter, almost eerily so. The suffocating tension she had brought into their lives was gone, but in its place was a heavy silence filled with unanswered questions and raw emotions. For Leela and her father, it was a time of reflection and healing, a journey they would have to take together. James spent most of the first day in his study, sifting through the remnants of the life he thought he knew. Lila could hear the rustling of papers, the occasional deep sigh, and the muffled sound of drawers opening and closing. She wanted to comfort him, but she also understood that he needed space to process everything. Lisa's betrayal wasn't just an attack on their trust. It was an assault on the love and hope they had carefully rebuilt after losing Lila's mother. By evening, James emerged from the study, his shoulders hunched and his face lined with exhaustion. He found Leela in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, her small frame dwarfed by the cushions. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly, sitting down beside her. Leela closed her book and looked up at him. "Hi, Daddy. Are you okay?" James let out a weary chuckle. "Not really. But I will be." He ruffled her hair gently, his expression softening. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about how brave you were. You didn't let Lisa scare you, even when I didn't believe you." Leela hesitated, then leaned her head against his arm. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let her hurt you." James wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I don't deserve a daughter as amazing as you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise, from now on, I'm going to be better. I'm going to listen to you, and I'm never going to let anyone come between us again." Leela hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with relief and love. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and therapy sessions. Lisa's arrest had made headlines in their small town, and the investigation into her past crimes was extensive. James worked closely with the police, providing testimony and evidence that helped build a solid case against her. It was a painful process, but it also brought him a sense of closure. The truth was finally out, and Lisa's reign of manipulation was over. Meanwhile, Leela continued to see Mrs. Rivera, who had become a trusted mentor and confidant. During their conversations, Mrs. Rivera encouraged Leila to talk about her feelings, not just about Lisa, but also about her late mother and the challenges of navigating life without her. Leila found it difficult at first, but slowly she began to open up. "I just miss her so much," Leila admitted one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. She always knew what to do. If she were here, none of this would have happened. Mrs. Rivera nodded, her gaze kind and understanding. "It's natural to feel that way, Leila. Your mom was your safe place, and losing her was a huge loss. But you've shown incredible strength. You protected your dad in a way most adults wouldn't have been able to." Leila blinked back tears. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" Mrs. Rivera smiled gently. "I think she'd be beyond proud. You have her courage, Leila. And her love is still with you, even if she's not." At home, James made an effort to rebuild their morning routines, the ones that had been disrupted by Lisa's presence. On a sunny Saturday morning, Leila stood on her step stool in the kitchen, carefully packing her father's lunch just as she had before. James watched her with a smile, his coffee mug in hand. "Triangles again," he teased as she cut the sandwich. "Of course," Leila said with a grin. "They still taste better." James chuckled, but then his expression turned serious. "You know, I've been thinking, maybe we should take a little trip, just the two of us. We could go somewhere your mom used to love." Leila's eyes lit up. "Really? Like the beach?" James nodded. "Exactly. We could use some fresh air and a break from all of this. What do you say?" Leila beamed. "I'd love that." The beach trip turned out to be exactly what they needed. As they walked along the shoreline, the salty breeze tangling Leila's braids and the sound of waves crashing against the sand, they felt a sense of peace that had eluded them for so long. They talked about everything: memories of Leila's mother, the fear they had faced with Lisa, and their hopes for the future. "Daddy," Leila said as they sat on a blanket, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think we'll ever be happy again? Like really happy?" James put an arm around her, pulling her close. "I do," he said firmly. "It's going to take time, and we'll have to work at it. But as long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Leila smiled, her heart filled with hope. For the first time in a long while, she believed him. Back at home, the changes in their lives became more apparent. James spent more time with Leila, taking her to the park, helping her with school projects, and even attempting to learn how to braid her hair, though his clumsy fingers always left her giggling. One evening, As they were watching a movie together, James turned to Leela. "I've been thinking about something else," he said. "What's that?" she asked, curious. "I think we should start volunteering," he said. "There are kids out there who've been through tough times, just like us. Maybe we can help them." Leela's eyes widened. "Really? Like at a shelter or something?" "Exactly," James said. "I think it would be good for us to give back, and it's something we can do together." Leela nodded eagerly. "I'd like that." As the weeks turned into months, Leela and James slowly rebuilt their lives. The scars left by Lisa's betrayal remained, but they didn't let them define their future. Instead, they focused on the love and resilience that had carried them through. For Leela, the experience had taught her an important lesson. Even in the face of fear and uncertainty, courage and love could prevail. And as she walked hand in hand with her father into their new beginning, she knew that nothing could ever break their bond again. The new normal. Months after Lisa's arrest, life for James and Leela Morgan had settled into a calmer, more purposeful rhythm. The storm Lisa had unleashed on their lives had left scars, but those wounds were slowly healing. Together, they were forging the new normal, one defined by honesty, love, and a determination to protect what mattered most. Discovering strength in the aftermath. One Saturday morning, James and Leela decided to clean out the attic, a space that had gone untouched for years. As they worked together, dusting off boxes and sorting through forgotten treasures, they stumbled upon a box labeled Margaret's Keepsakes. Leela's breath caught. "Mum's stuff?" she asked softly. James nodded, brushing his hand over the box with a wistful smile. "I packed this up after she passed. I wasn't ready to go through it back then." Leela sat cross-legged on the floor, her heart aching and hopeful all at once. "Can we look now?" James hesitated, then nodded. "I think it's time." Inside the box were photographs, journals, and small mementos of Leela's mother, Margaret. There were pictures of her as a young woman, smiling brightly with windswept hair, and family photos of the three of them, their joy captured forever in those frames. "Look at this," James said, holding up a small locket. He opened it to reveal two tiny pictures inside, one of Margaret and one of Leela as a baby. She used to wear this every day. Leela's fingers traced the locket delicately. "She looks so happy," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "She was," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "She loved us more than anything." They spent hours going through the box, sharing stories and memories. For James, it was a way to reconnect with the woman he had loved deeply. For Leela, it was a chance to learn more about her mother and feel closer to her again. Reconnecting with the community. Determined to give back, James and Leela followed through on their promise to volunteer. They joined a local outreach program that supported families in crisis, offering meals, supplies, and counseling to those in need. Their first day at the shelter was eye-opening. Leela helped organize a toy drive, while James assisted with meal prep in the kitchen. They met families who had endured unimaginable hardships, but still found ways to smile and push forward. One little girl, around Lila's age, caught her attention. She had dark curly hair and big curious eyes, but seemed shy and withdrawn. Leela approached her, holding out a stuffed animal from the toy pile. "Hi, I'm Leela," she said gently. "Do you like bears? This one's super soft." The girl hesitated before nodding, taking the bear with a small smile. "I'm Maya." "Nice to meet you, Maya," Leela said. "Do you want to help me organize these toys? We can make them look really nice for the other kids." Maya's eyes lit up, and for the rest of the day, the two girls worked side by side, laughing and chatting like old friends. By the time James and Leela left the shelter that evening, Leela felt a warm sense of fulfillment. She had made a difference, even if it was small. "That was incredible, Daddy," she said as they drove home. "Can we come back next weekend?" James smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Absolutely, sweetheart. Facing Lisa's trial. Though they had moved forward, the specter of Lisa's crimes loomed as her trial approached. James and Leila were called to testify, a daunting prospect that reopened old wounds. The courtroom was stark and intimidating, with Lisa sitting at the defendant's table, her demeanor cold and detached. Leila felt a shiver run down her spine when Lisa's eyes briefly met hers, but she straightened her back and held her ground. When James took the stand, his voice was steady but filled with emotion. He spoke about the trust Lisa had violated, the harm she had caused, and how her manipulation had nearly destroyed their family. His words were powerful, resonating with the courtroom. Then it was Leila's turn. As she sat in the witness chair, she felt every pair of eyes on her. But she remembered what Mrs. Rivera had told her. "The truth is your strength, Leila. Speak it, and no one can take that from you." With a deep breath, Leila recounted everything she had witnessed. Lisa's phone calls, the pills, the documents she had found, and the threats Lisa had made. Her voice didn't waver, even when Lisa's lawyer attempted to discredit her as a child with an overactive imagination. "I'm not making this up," Leila said firmly. "I love my dad, and I would do anything to protect him. Lisa hurt him, and she was going to hurt him more if I didn't stop her." By the time the trial concluded, Lisa was found guilty on multiple charges, including attempted fraud, drugging James without consent, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to prison, and though Leila and James knew the legal battle was over, the emotional scars would take longer to heal. Embracing a brighter future, with Lisa out of their lives for good, James and Leila focused on building a brighter future. They took their volunteering efforts further, organizing fundraisers and events to support the shelter and other community programs. Their bond grew stronger as they worked together, finding purpose in helping others. One afternoon, as they were setting up for a community picnic, James looked at Leila with a smile. "You know, you've taught me something important, kiddo." "What's that?" Leila asked, stacking plates on a table. "You've shown me how strong love and courage can be," he said. "Even when things seem impossible, we can get through them together." Leila grinned. "You've taught me a lot too, Daddy. Like how to tie a tie." "Sort of." They both laughed, the sound carrying through the park like music. A special surprise. On the anniversary of Margaret's birthday, James and Leila planned a small, private celebration to honor her memory. They visited her favorite park, bringing flowers and a picnic basket filled with her favorite foods. As they sat by the lake, James handed Leila a small box. "This is for you," he said. Leila opened it to find the locket they had discovered in the attic. Inside, James had added a new photo, one of the two of them, taken during their recent beach trip. "Your mom would want you to have this," James said. "It's a reminder that no matter what happens, we're always a family." Leila's eyes filled with tears as she put the locket around her neck. "Thank you, Daddy. I'll never take it off." Looking ahead, as the sun set that evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, James and Leila sat together, reflecting on how far they had come. Their journey had been painful, but it had also brought them closer, revealing a strength they hadn't known they possessed. For Leila, the experience had taught her that even in the face of darkness, there was always a way to find the light. And as she leaned against her father, the locket resting against her heart, she knew that their future was bright, filled with hope, love, and the unbreakable bond of family. The ripple effect. The courtroom drama and Lisa's arrest had been the crescendo of their story, but for Leila and James, the aftermath was just as defining. The Morgan household, once tinged with fear and mistrust, was now a sanctuary of growth and renewal. Yet, as they moved forward, both father and daughter discovered that the challenges they faced had ripple effects far beyond their own lives. Building a legacy. James had always been a private man, content with his job and the quiet routines of family life. But the ordeal with Lisa had ignited something in him, a desire to do more, not just for Leila, but for the community. Inspired by their volunteering at the shelter, He began drafting plans for a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families in crisis. One evening, he shared his idea with Layla over dinner. "I was thinking about starting something," he said, his tone hesitant but hopeful. "A foundation, maybe. Something to help people like us. Families who've been through tough times." Layla's eyes lit up. "Really? Like what we've been doing at the shelter?" "Exactly," James said, his confidence growing. "But bigger. I want to provide legal resources, counseling, and financial aid to people who need it. Too many families don't know where to turn when they're in trouble." Layla grinned. "Can I help?" "Of course," James said, smiling back. "In fact, I was hoping you'd be my partner in this. I want to call it the Morgan Foundation. What do you think?" "I think Mom would be proud," Layla said softly, her eyes shining with emotion. The school assembly. News of Lisa's crimes had spread through the community, and while most people were supportive, Layla couldn't escape the whispers and stares at school. She had always been a quiet, studious kid, but now she found herself the center of attention in a way she hadn't asked for. One day, her teacher, Mrs. Hanover, approached her with an idea. "Layla, I know the past few months have been difficult," she said gently, "but I think your story could inspire others. Would you consider speaking at our next school assembly? You could talk about courage, standing up for what's right, and what you've learned." Layla hesitated. The thought of standing on stage in front of the entire school made her stomach twist. But then she remembered Mrs. Rivera's words. "The truth is your strength." Maybe sharing her story could help someone else. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady. The day of the assembly arrived, and Layla stood backstage, her palms sweaty and her heart racing. She had rehearsed her speech a dozen times. But now, as the auditorium filled with students and teachers, her nerves threatened to overwhelm her. Then she spotted her father in the front row, smiling up at her. He gave her a thumbs up, and she felt a surge of courage. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice echoing through the microphone. "My name is Layla Morgan, and I want to tell you a story about bravery." She spoke about her mother, her father, and the life they had built together. She talked about Lisa and the fear of not being believed. But most importantly, she spoke about the power of trust, love, and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. By the time she finished, the auditorium was silent, every eye fixed on her. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room. Layla felt a warmth spread through her chest as her peers and teachers rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. For the first time, she felt not just brave, but proud. Unexpected connections. The Morgan Foundation took off faster than James had anticipated. Donations poured in from neighbors, local businesses, and even strangers who had heard their story. Layla became an unofficial spokesperson for the foundation, her school assembly speech inspiring others to get involved. One day, while James was working at the foundation's new office, he received a visit from a woman in her early 30s, holding the hand of a young boy. "Mr. Morgan," she said hesitantly. "Yes," James said, standing to greet her. "How can I help you?" "My name is Sarah. I heard about your foundation, and I think you might have saved my life." James frowned in confusion. "I'm not sure I understand." Sarah explained that she had been in an abusive relationship and was too afraid to leave. But after reading about Layla's bravery and the resources offered by the Morgan Foundation, she had found the courage to escape and seek help. Now she was rebuilding her life and wanted to thank James and Layla in person. "You gave me hope when I thought I had none," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I'll never be able to repay you." James felt a lump in his throat as he shook her hand. "You've already repaid us," he said, "by taking the first step." Reconnecting with joy. As their lives stabilized, James and Layla began rediscovering the simple joys they had once taken for granted. Saturday mornings became their favorite time, spent hiking in the nearby woods, visiting the farmer's market, or trying new recipes together in the kitchen. One morning, as they worked side by side on a stack of pancakes, James looked at Leela and smiled. "You know what I've realized?" "What?" she asked, flipping a pancake expertly. "You're not just my daughter. You're my hero," he said, his voice filled with love. Leela laughed, her face flushing with pride. "You're my hero too, Daddy." Looking toward the future, as the years passed, the foundation grew, helping hundreds of families across the state. Leela became a prominent figure in the community, known not just for her courage, but for her kindness and determination. She excelled in school, driven by a desire to make the world a better place, one small step at a time. One day, while sitting on the porch with James, watching the sunset, Leela turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever stop missing Mom?" she asked. James sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't think so," he said honestly, "but I think that's okay. Missing her means she's still with us in a way." Leela nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "I like that." As the sun dipped below the trees, casting the sky in shades of gold and pink, James and Leela sat in comfortable silence, knowing that no matter what the future held, they had already overcome the worst. Together, they had transformed their pain into something beautiful, a legacy of love, resilience, and hope. And in that moment, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next. Together.